Hey everyone, it's Jack, and today I'm going to take a look at GhostBSD. GhostBSD is a derivative of Unix. GhostBSD actually stands for Berkeley Software Distribution, and originally it used to be Berkeley Linux, I believe, way back in the day, and then the name changed. However, now it is GhostBSD is based on FreeBSD, which is one of the most popular BSDs, and it also has a desktop on it, which I believe is XFCE. It kind of takes the pain out of it, makes it a little bit easier. Not that it's that hard to do it from FreeBSD, but on FreeBSD, it sets it up strictly in the console. And the console is great if you're setting up a server. Actually, that's probably the way you ought to set it up, is without a GUI, just in a console. That's the way I've run Linux servers in the past. Yes, FreeBSD is a great way to go, setting up a server. OpenBSD, I think, is even more secure, at least by default. So, yeah. But GhostBSD has got a really interesting name. I kind of like that. It sounds like something that would be endorsed by the Flying Dutchman. Arr, GhostBSD is the OS for me. Arr. But I want to take a quick look at this. I think it would be really cool, and I'm going to install it on hardware too. That ought to be an extra challenge. This is based on FreeBSD 13. Back when 12 came out, I could not get it to work on hardware at all. No matter what I did, and I had like 3 or 4 different machines here. None of them worked. So I had absolutely no luck. I'm thinking with 13, it should be a different story. So I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to go ahead, and as you can see from the website here, it's shown a quick screenshot of the XFCE desktop here. So it's kind of cool, simple, elegant, and it's BSD. And it actually mentions here that it's built on top of the FreeBSD code, with roots going back to the University of California, Berkeley Unix research. And so, yes, Unix is a very secure environment, of course, obviously. And some people don't know it, but Mac OS is based on Unix, actually a derivative called Darwin. Because of licensing, Mac adopted Unix so they could kind of charge for their stuff and keep it proprietary. Because the licensing is different. And also Unix is an OS, which is different from Linux, whereas Linux is really a kernel and not an OS. You kind of make it into an OS by putting it all together and having a desktop and everything, but it's actually a GNU kernel licensed under the GNU. So here we got the latest version as of the time of this video is from May 11th, 2021. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to download this guy and check it out. I'll be right back. Okay, now I'm booted into the live environment here. And so here we have our desktop here with the XFCE background. And so we got a nice big desktop. Our icons down here is our menu, which is the Whisker menu there, XFCE, nice. And so it all looks pretty standard XFCE right here, right out of the box. And right clicking, we got an applications menu and all the stuff we'd kind of expect to see. And here's our Thunar file manager. And I like the theming too on the window. So that's kind of cool. Decorations. I'm going to go ahead and open up this installer here. Let's check it out. Looks like a pretty straightforward installer, Calamares. And I'm going to go ahead with the default there with English. I'm not going to mess with the keyboard setup. Although you can go in here and select different models, but I'd rather just go with the default. Now I'm going to just test my keyboard just to make sure it's working. Go with hi there. All right, then we'll hit next. And America is correct. And so for the city, I'm going to go with New York. That's in my time zone. And now here I want to go with a custom because I'm going to install this on a separate partition. And this is probably going to cause complications because dual booting BSD with another OS is not typically an easy thing to do. So hopefully I don't mess this up. There's my FAT32 partition, but I'm going to want to go with my third partition, which is SDA03. We just want to delete everything in there. And then I'm going to go with auto, and then that'll auto partition everything. I also think I'm going to change my file system to UFS. ZFS has nice redundancy and so forth, but I think it might be harder to dual boot with. So just to be safe, I'm going to go with UFS. And the swap, I guess we'll go ahead and leave that as default, and it's showing UFS as our boot, our root. So, and we want to stay with FreeBSD EFI loader only. And then I'll pipe in my password. And super weak, just the way we like it. Okay. So now I'll do the same password. Hit install. And now hopefully it didn't hose my other partition, which I don't think it will. Actually, I can see down here that it is using this. So, very good. Excellent. It is now going on SDA3, which is what I want, or ADA-S3. So, I'm going to go ahead and let this install, and I'll be right back. All right. So, the install was successful. I'm going to go ahead and just do a restart on this guy, and then we'll see how it worked. I'll see you in a minute. What? We're back in Linux. What happened? Well, nothing actually. But remember, we're dual booting. And so, since we're dual booting FreeBSD and Linux together, or it could be Windows, FreeBSD won't automatically just show up in the grub menu. So we got to put it in there. I'm going to show you how we do that. And it took me a lot of research to figure this out because I couldn't get it working for a long time. And finally I did. So I'm going to share with you what I did, just in case you end up in a situation where you want to dual boot FreeBSD on your system rather than erasing the whole hard drive. So first of all, what I did was I had to go in here and edit my grub custom file. And so what I did to do that was I used sudo nano, and I'm just going to take this font real quick and just kind of crank that up a little. Let's go with select and then close. There we go. So first I did a sudo nano and etc / grub.d / 40 _ custom. And then password, of course. And then what we have is something like this. And so what I had to do was I had to put an entry in here. By default, you don't want to touch anything else in here, especially anything above. So what you want to do is just arrow down here if you're using nano, assuming. And then we're going to paste something in. I'm going to just go ahead and open up Thunar here. And I made this little grub text file because it took a lot of research to get this working. And I did all kinds of Googling and everything else. And no one little thing just worked for me. I had to kind of try a combination of stuff, and I finally got something working. So it wasn't easy. And my situation is I'm using a UEFI boot. A lot of these are based on legacy booting, not really kind of tailored towards newer stuff. And here is a solution I found using chain loader, which is supposed to work in Arch and probably be on the legacy, I don't know, but it didn't work for me. This is another thing that didn't work for me. And again, this is geared towards legacy again. The only thing that worked for me is this. And this is actually booting directly to the BSD kernel. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And by the way, I left this info in the description below, just in case you want to try it yourself. And so I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in there. And now we have a menu entry, FreeBSD, and then it's got all this stuff, and it's calling to the kernel. Now on my drive, my partition was 3. So HD0 is the hard drive, my first hard drive, and then 3 represents partition 3. So if you were doing the same thing and you were on a different partition, then you'll need to change that number to represent your partition. And you can do that by using lsblock or lsblk, and that'll list out things for you. And then the rest of it, I think you can, except for here, again, you want to substitute this 3 for whatever your partition is. So if your partition is number 2, then this would be ADA0S2A. This is representing your drive and your partition. And again, 0 is like your hard drive, equivalent to HD0 here. All right, so that's what I did. I popped that in there, and then I went and did a reboot, and it didn't show up in my grub menu. What? Now what? So that's what really threw me off, because I could not get it to show up in my menu no matter what I did. I kind of got to the point where I thought nothing was going to work. But then I made this discovery, and I'll show you what that is. So what I found out was I had to go in here and edit the default grub file, and I'll show you where that is. That would be sudo nano, because I'm using the nano editor, and then etc/default/grub. If you hit that, you'll get this grub configuration for your bootloader. And what I had to do was I had to change grub default equals 0. I had to change 0 to FreeBSD. Once I set that, then when I did a reboot, there it was, right in my grub menu. And of course it was selected by default because it's default. So if you're dual booting, you'll have to scroll up to your Linux if you want to boot into Linux. But that was the only way I could get it to show up in the menu, and it worked. So when I hit that, I was able to reboot right into FreeBSD. It was a beautiful thing. And then when I got into FreeBSD, as it was booting, it gave me this message here that said, failed to add WCMTRR, or blah, blah, blah. Performance may suffer. And then it went right to a login prompt in the console. So I was like, what? And not really thinking, I just kind of went back into Linux and I Googled that error message. And the first result I got, somebody said, are you running an Intel card? And the guy said, yes, I am. And it said, that's your problem. It doesn't work with Intel graphics. And I'm like, I'm running Intel graphics. So I thought, well, that's that. I guess it's just not going to work with my hardware. And so I was about ready to go into virtual and just kind of do this whole video in virtual. But I decided to press on, and I looked at a few more results, and somebody else said, just ignore it. And that was kind of coming from the devs, I think, out of GitHub. So I thought, okay, maybe there's more to this. So I rebooted back in, got back to that terminal on the reboot. So I just went ahead and logged in. And then I decided just to run startx. And when I did, boom, I was in. So that's all I had to do. I just had to manually startx. And if I remember right, in FreeBSD, you had to do that anyway. And I don't know if it's related, but for some reason, like in your init.rc, your .init.rc, there's a reference in there for startxfce4. And that doesn't really load, but if you type that in manually at the login prompt, instead of startx, you can put startxfce4, and it'll do the same thing. It'll boot right into your desktop, but it doesn't really do it from .init.rc, and I'm not really sure why, and it could be related to this error message there, the one that I was told to ignore. But it's not really a deal killer. I mean, if I wanted to use FreeBSD on the side there, I don't really care if I have to type startx or startxfce4. That was the solution. That's how I made it work. It took a lot of research and a lot of hair pulling, a bit of frustration, and maybe if you're booting legacy style, maybe it's not that big a deal. But for my UEFI setup, this is what I had to do, and that was the only thing that worked for me, was booting straight to the kernel. And so this really was the thing that saved it for me. So that's that. Let's get into FreeBSD or GhostBSD. Oh, but first, before when I was saying you wanted to look at your drives, what I was using was LS block, so I just LSBLK, and that'll list out your different drives here. And so right now what I got is my drive here, SDA1 or SDA, and then partition 1, 2, and 3. Partition 3 is where I have this guy here. And the other thing that's very important is after you update your grub, your custom grub 40, and also the default grub, you need to run in here sudo update grub. So that's important. You need to run that. And so after you run that, then it's going to go ahead and it's going to update all the stuff that you had in there. And it's also going to run something called OS prober. And so it will also find your partition with the FreeBSD on it, and it'll say unknown OS on FreeBSD. Right now, I don't have my grub set up for that because I'm actually recording this after I solved everything. So I'm not actually booting to it anymore. But when I was, it was showing there that there was an unknown operating system on SDA3. And so that's normal. That's what it should say. So that's good if you see that. And then I ran AWK to actually look at my boot menu grub before I actually rebooted. And that's an optional thing too. So let's get at it. Okay, and here we are. We are in our live desktop. I mean, not our live. We are in our install. So we got this all installed now. So this is what happened after I did all that stuff in Linux there to get it going. Now here we have our XFCE menu, which is pretty standard. And let me just scooch up here real quick so we can see bottom taskbar because I'm kind of in the way there. I'm gonna kind of go like this. There we go. I think that's a little better. That kind of gets me out of the way. So anyway, now we can see this stuff down here. Kind of see what we got here. These are our desktops here. And then we got our clock with our calendar, which is always cool. And then our notifications bar here. And then our logout stuff when we want to quit. So yeah, kind of a nice standard XFCE menu bar down there. And then we have our Thunar file manager. So that's looking pretty good. And it looks like that's 4.168, the most current, I believe. And so here's our right click, your standard XFCE right click menu here on the desktop. So really it all looks very familiar with Linux. And then here we have our fish terminal, and this is XFCE terminal here, I believe. And just running top here just to see what our, wow, not bad, 592 megs active. So that's pretty good actually. Better than I was expecting. I think in the live version when I was on ZFS, I kind of took a look at the memory and it was a lot higher. But of course, ZFS is using more memory than UFS would anyway. Not that that's a bad thing. That's actually a good thing because of the way ZFS is. It's the nature of ZFS. Okay, let's explore a little bit and see what else we got. So if we go in here in our XFCE menu, when I scroll over these things, it's not really changing categories. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of change my settings, but not in there. But I'll just set that aside because I'm going to need that. But if I right click here and select properties, so if I go in here and then I believe it's under behavior and then switch categories by hovering. There we go. That's better. So that'll give us a nicer result. I'm going to go ahead and hit close. Now when we scroll up here, they're all changing as I go, and I kind of like that better. That's more comfortable for me. So let's just kind of check this stuff out. Here we have our search bar, so we can instantly search for apps. And of course, anybody familiar with XFCE will know that right off the bat. Anyway, and so in our accessories, we got all this stuff that you would normally find. Password manager, terminal, that's nice to have access to. There's our X archiver. And then under development, we have Glade. That's kind of cool for doing GUI design. WX widgets, probably. And then We have our Firefox for web browser and transmission for a torrent. Then we have a simple screen recorder and VLC. That's pretty cool. And evolution. And under settings, we got the stuff that I would typically expect to see in XFCE. And nothing installed for Office, which is fine. Shows that it's pretty low on bloat. We can pretty much configure and install things as we want. Let's open this up. Speaking of installing, and this is our software station. This is kind of equivalent to your Synaptics if you're using Ubuntu or Debian, or your PAMAC for you Arch users. And so here we got just all these different categories for our software. And so pretty much everything you can think of is probably right in here. So like if I just did a search here for like Audacity, might as well go ahead and install that. I'm going to check that. Confirm. And so that'll install Audacity. So yeah, I mean, just like any other visual package manager, it really feels like going from Linux to BSD is pretty flawless. But you want to keep in mind too that FreeBSD is not Linux. They are different, even though there's so many similarities. But if you go in there thinking that you're going to just pick where you left off with Linux, you might be in for a surprise because things do run a bit differently. Okay, I was just launching Audacity here and I got this little error. So I'm just going to hit continue. I think it's a benign error. It looks like it went ahead and launched. And, I think I might know what that error was from. I'm going to go ahead and go in here. And I think if I set cooked mode to off, that's probably maybe related, maybe not. I don't know. But just out of curiosity, I'm just going to go ahead and reopen it. And there we go. No error messages. So that probably fixed it. Either that or it would have gone away anyway. Hard to say. So cool. And it looks like we're running Audacity 3.02. That looks pretty current, even though I'm not 100% sure what the latest version is. So let's do this. Sudo package install pkg Inkscape. This is how we do it through the console. So instead of using pacman or apt-get apt install, we would use pkg and access the packager. And so now it's going ahead and installing. This ought to feel very familiar. Not really a huge stretch to go from apt or pacman to using pkg. Or a Fedora user would use DNF. So instead of DNF, we're just in pkg. Easy peasy. And it looks like that all installed just fine. So I'm going to go up here, hit Inkscape, and there we go. Nice. And FreeBSD is really, if you're into servers and you want to configure a server, FreeBSD really is a great way to go. And that would be kind of what we have here, minus the GUI without the XFCE desktop. Although you could put one on there if you want, but for a server, I don't think I would do that. So let's see what version of Firefox we got here. And it looks like it's 88.0.1. All right. So Firefox is working A0K. So it looks like this install really went well. Everything seems to be pretty snappy here as I'm running through these. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. And I'm going to just kind of check these wallpapers out. And it looks like the wallpapers are kind of like the standard XFCE wallpapers, I think. They do kind of look familiar. That's kind of a nice thing. Got this little forest action going on there. And some cold snow. Ugh. And I kind of like that. That's kind of cool. With the benches and the leaf. But I don't want summer to be over yet. So, yeah. Let's slide on here to something else. That's kind of cool. Big cliff. But again, we got a bunch of snow. What's this one? Oh, I kind of like that. Wow, that's cool. Even though it's got that hint of autumn again, but still cool. That's cool too. Literally. Cool, I like that. I think I've seen that one before too. That's a nice background. And so is that. At least my icons up in the corner there are clear. Nice. Okay. I think I'm just gonna go with kind of using a light theme here. So maybe I'll just use a dark wallpaper. That kind of looks like that goes good with a light theme that we got going on at the moment. Although I might change that around. Why not? And I'm just gonna crank up the sizes of my icons, and this is where you would do it right here under icons in this menu. And then here you can even adjust your layout. So if you want it horizontal, kind of like the way KDE does it now, there you go. And so then you got all these other choices. You can have them on the bottom, starting and vertical and horizontal and everything else. So a lot of choices. That's always nice. And then I think all the defaults are pretty cool. I'm good with that. And then down here at the bottom, we got our default icons, which is your home and trash and removable drives, file system. So I'm good with that too. I kind of like they're all checked by default. And then let's look at our panel preferences. So here we got our panel at the bottom, and right now it's a light panel. We go over here to appearance. Here we got our style and our background and our dark mode. I think I'm gonna turn that on. Yeah, that looks better. That kind of gives this FreeBSD a little more cooler look and not so vanilla, generic. And so now we got a nice dark menu, and I'm liking that. That's looking good. And I kind of like the window decorations too. See what our style is. So we're running Vimix. That's kind of cool. I like it. And Graybird Dark, I like that too. The Graybird light version. Then we have Vimix Dark. How's that look? Oh yeah, that's a pretty nice look too. You know, that's a tough call between Graybird and Vimix, but I think I'm going to use one of these dark themes. Yeah, I guess that's good. And then our icons, it looks like we're using the Koger. I don't know how you pronounce that, but I think Koger is kind of what it looks like. What's this? Vivacious Colors Dark. Let me open up my Thunar here so we can get a better idea of what they look like. Oh, okay, yeah, that looks pretty good, actually. I like that gold color on the icons. That's pretty cool. Colorful. That looks like it changes the home icon in your side pane there between a light color and a dark. So that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll go with the light color there. Then we have Vivacious Colors. I think I'm going to go with maybe this one. Then here's our font settings and other settings. I think I'm good with that for now. And then here's our desktop settings, which we were already in. And then our file manager settings. So in Thunar, I always like to go down here and change the format from today to today at. I kind of like having a little more accuracy because a lot of times I need to look at the times in my file, especially when I'm making videos. And so everything else I think is pretty good right at their defaults. And then our panel settings where we were already. Here's our window manager, manager tweaks. So if we jump in here, compositor is probably the only thing I would change in here. And I kind of like going down here and like making the window decorations a little more opaque. And you can see it over here on the Thunar, how the opacity has changed now. It never really changes in the tweaks dialog itself, but you got to look at other windows to see the changes. And now I got some transparency when I drag. I like having that too. Maybe just a little less, I think. Bump that up. That's pretty good, I think. You just touch more. All right. And then you just make that a little less. There we go. Yeah, just a slight transparency there. And then in here, these are our terminal settings. And I kind of like having a transparent background too on our terminal. For some reason, I'm not getting one. I think I'm not an XFCE terminal. That's me. Or I just got to relaunch it maybe. There we go. That's better. Okay. So yeah, a little bit of transparency. I don't like to have too much. Kind of just a tad. I'm going to scooch over a little bit temporarily. So I got this bumped way up So it's just a little bit of transparency. All right. For keyboard behavior, I like the num lock on, so I'm going to go ahead and set that. And then for mouse settings, I think are probably fine where they are, but if you want to adjust any of that, this is the place to do it. And then here's our cursors. Those are cool. I kind of like the one it's on now, Ogre Dark, so I probably won't change that. Ed weight is kind of boring. But, you know, it is also good. But I'm just used to it, so I like having a little flavor once in a while. And then the directories are empty, of course, because they're new. Now here's our drives. As you can see, it's showing our drive that our OS is installed on. However, you can't see the drive. So I'm going to run gpart. You notice we can't see our Linux drive, so we got to mount those. And so, for example, the one I would really want to mount if I was using this as a semi-daily driver would be my home partition. I have that on a separate partition, and that would be SDA4, or in this case, it would be ADA0S4, and that's this one here. So ADA0 and 4. But to mount it, I would say sudo mount -t space ext2fs space /dev/ada0s4 and then space, and then I'm going to put it in a folder. I'm going to create a folder here in my home folder, and we'll just mount it to that. So I'm just going to call it Linux Home. That's kind of nice and easy to remember. So back in here, I'm going to direct it to /usr home /Linux home. And that's another differentiation with BSD, is the home directory is typically in USR home rather than just /. What did I type wrong? Yeah, should be USR. USR/home. Oh, my user. Yes, Toadwick. That was dumb. Okay. So just back up here and type in Toadwick / there we go. Now it should work. That's better. Okay. Yeah, silly mistake. Now, if we go into this folder, we should see our home partition here in Linux Home. Go in there, and there it is. So now it's mounted. We can see all our stuff on our Linux drive. How cool is that? So now we have access to all the gold from FreeBSD. Okay. So that's how you do that. Easy peasy. And then here we have our computer. So we have ADA0S1. So as you can see, in BSD, we use ADA0S and then the drive number or partition number, as opposed to SDA0, SDA1, 2, 3, like you would in Linux. So that's kind of another differentiation there. And here's our session and startup. So just like in Linux, we can go ahead and set up our startup stuff right here for some of our apps. We want them to load at login. So yeah, I think I pretty much covered everything. And so if you go into FreeBSD, recognizing that it's not Linux, and there are certain Linux apps that are only available in Linux, like Flowblade is probably a good example, a video editor, and that's only made for Linux, and if you try to launch it in FreeBSD, it's not going to work. And I don't think there's a FreeBSD version available. That's just kind of one example, but if you have certain Linux apps that you must have, and they don't have a FreeBSD version, then you got to kind of keep in mind that it's probably not going to run. And so here we got our update. So I'm just going to go ahead and run that because I noticed the updater was there. So it's kind of nice that we got the updater too. So that kind of works like it does on Linux as well. And so I'll just kind of let that do its thing. And while that's doing its thing, I just want to show you the exinit-rc. I tried putting execute startx in here just to see if that would kind of automatically go in there. And of course it didn't, because startx fce4 should have worked as well. just by itself, but I stuck that in there just for the heck of it. And it didn't work, so didn't make any difference. But typically that exinit RC is where you kind of have your settings there for starting your X session. However, that didn't make any difference. But like I said before, definitely not a deal killer. I don't care that I have to log in at the terminal and type startx FCE4. And I didn't notice a difference between either. So, I got the same result, got into the desktop just fine. And so, yeah, that's all good. I really like GhostBSD. I think would be a time saver if you wanted to just set something up FreeBSD for the desktop and not have to go through the extra hoops. Installing all that by hand is a little bit more work, and so GhostBSD makes it all easy and done for you and all set up and configured. And so it's a really nice thing, and it's kind of a rare thing with FreeBSD. And you also want to keep in mind your hardware could be an issue. The hardware support isn't quite as comprehensive as it is in Linux. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind. The file structure is a little bit different because in FreeBSD, it's an entire operating system in itself. So because this is a Unix derivative here of Unix, it is a complete operating system as opposed to Linux, which is a kernel. And then a bunch of other stuff added to it to make it all work, whether it's window managers or desktop environments and all the little scripts that go around it. And so yeah, there is a difference, and the licensing kind of applies to the kernel and anything kernel's running, I guess, although I'm not a licensing expert, so can't tell you exactly how that works. But yes, I give GhostBSD a double thumbs up. It's really cool, and I think I'm just going to keep this on my other partition just for fun and just kind of play with it a little more. It's kind of neat to be in another OS and just kind of explore and learn a little more about it. So this was a really great time, and I hope it was a little bit helpful and educational to you. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to leave that thumbs up and hit subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.